Hey everybody, I'm Amanda with DevExpress and welcome to today's webinar, Using DevExtreme ASP.NET MVC Controls Easily in ASP.NET Core 2.0, presented by DevExpress Web Program Manager Mehul Hari. In this session, learn how to use the versatile DevExtreme ASP.NET MVC controls in the latest ASP.NET Core 2.0 framework. You'll learn about support for Razor Pages, Visual Studio 2017, and performance improvements. This session is being recorded and it will be made available on our DevExpress YouTube channel later today. We will also do a live Q&A at the end of this presentation. Just type your questions in the GoToWebinar control panel at any time throughout the broadcast. All right, thank you so much for joining us. I will now hand things over to Mehul.
Thank you, Amanda. Good morning, welcome everyone. So as Amanda mentioned, this is how to easily get started with the DevExtreme MVC controls for ASP.NET Core 2.0. And in today's webinar, we are going to basically have a quick overview of what this, what we're going to cover today. And I'll go through just about everything in terms of what this product is, how it fits into the other DevExpress products out there. I've heard rumblings from a couple of customers saying, wow, you guys got so much for the web now, it's hard to decide what to use. And so I hope to make that a little bit clearer and where this fits in with the strategy and is this product for you. And then we'll have a very quick getting started approach, and that'll do a short demo to show you how you can use our controls within ASP.NET Core 2.0. And then finally, we'll cover what the status of this project currently is and what we've got coming up in the future. All right, so let's begin. This is a level 100 webinar. However, it's helpful if you have some experience with ASP.NET MVC, specifically ASP.NET Core. Now, I expect that since you read ASP.NET Core 2.0, you probably have some exposure to it. But if you don't, you don't have to know everything about it. Mostly what I'll cover today is the basics of getting started and file new and those kind of aspects. Now, it's also helpful if you know a little bit about JavaScript, because DevExtreme is our client-side JavaScript library. And so I'll talk about that in just a sec. So what is this product? Well, specifically, we had a lot of customers who said, hey, listen, we really love these excellent client-side controls that you have. And you can see them if you go to js.devexpress.com. Now, these are completely written for the client side, which means you can use them anywhere. They render on the client side, so the data binding is a little bit different than server-side controls. Now, you might say, wait a minute, but I thought I was here for MVC. Well, you are, and that's because we actually have a set of MVC controls. Now, if you see under our products menu, you'll see web forms and MVC. Now, these are what I, playfully term classic, but they're of course, doesn't mean anything other than that they were there in the beginning. So when we first had web forms and we made MVC controls sort of based around a web forms approach, and a lot of people love this. There's a lot of controls in this library. In fact, we've got these big office type controls like rich edit and spreadsheet and stuff in there. However, as the web has changed over the years, a lot of people said, no, I want client-side rendering with ASP.NET MVC. We really love JavaScript, and that's what I want. And so that's where we developed the DevExtreme ASP.NET MVC controls. Now, what's nice is we were able to take every one of our controls from the client-side approach and bring it to ASP.NET MVC. Now, these are what we call wrapped controls, but they are native for ASP.NET MVC and ASP.NET Core. So that means you get all the charting controls, you get all the major controls, data grid, pivot grid, tree list, mapping, etc. And what's nice is anytime a new control gets added to DevExtreme, we're able to easily add that to the DevExtreme MVC controls as well, which of course work with ASP.NET Core 1.1 and 2.0. So in fact, we have a new funnel widget that we've blogged about recently coming out in the next major release 17.2 that'll be available for ASP.NET MVC as well. So that's basically in a nutshell what the product is. The DevExtreme MVC controls were first developed for ASP.MVC, and then we found, oh, they completely and natively work great with ASP.NET Core 1.0. And recently, when ASP.NET Core 2.0 was just released, well, we saw, they have a great introduction blog. What this is for the Razor pages. But if you take a look on channel 9, these really smart guys, they talk about at the recent .NET Conf what ASP.NET Core has and so forth. So there's all sorts of things you can find on ASP.NET Core on Microsoft's websites. But specifically for us, we first released ASP.NET Core back in 17.1. So we started developing these controls last year, and we released in 17.1. And so they are out, and you've seen me talk about this before in the webinar. But with ASP.NET Core 2.0, they've had some major enhancements. In fact, they've had, let's take a look. If you go to ASP.NET, and if you take a look at their announcing post announcing ASP.NET Core 2.0, it covers kind of the basics. Now, I'm not going to dive too deep into this. However, they want to first tell you that this release, a lot of times customers aren't ready to jump on a 1.0 product. Well, they've also had a 1.1 release of ASP.NET Core that was very good, but 2.0 really I think solidifies a lot of the philosophy and the approach they want to go forward with ASP.NET Core. And so not only have they vastly improved performance, that you can, and they talk about that, and they added things like context pooling, but the fact that it's now a very solid server that runs cross-platform, and it competes with some of the best web servers out there. And what's nice about this is that Microsoft is really pushing on this because they want you to choose Core for many reasons. Of course, Microsoft has always been a developer-friendly company, but one of the key pillars for success is Azure. Of course, Office is the other one, and I believe Windows maybe the third one. But in essence, ASP.NET Core makes it easy to use any platform like Linux or Mac-based or Windows, and of course they want you to choose Azure to host a lot of this stuff up there, and I recommend it. Azure is great. But what's nice is in ASP.NET Core 2.0, not only have they improved performance, but they introduced some new items like Razor Pages. Now, Razor Pages is an alternative to the Model View Controller approach, meaning that it's still compatible with Model View Controller, but with Razor Pages, you don't have separate model, view, and controller. You actually have a single page. Now, I'm not going to get into it too much, but basically, you have a view that can talk directly with the model, and then you have a code behind page for the view. Now, it sounds like web forms, but it's not, and you get all the benefits that you do with testability and everything with MVC. And Razor Pages are really cool. And of course, as I mentioned today, our HTML helpers are completely compatible with everything in ASP.NET Core 2.0, including Razor Pages. So, as I mentioned, let me get back to what this product is. So, as I mentioned, we've supported ASP.NET Core 1.0 and 1.1 for a while now. Now that 2.0 has just been released a couple months ago, we are supporting 2.0 as well. Now, this product includes some great features. So this product gives you, as I mentioned, every feature of DevExtreme in your MVC app. So that means you get support for Razor syntax. Now, if you love ASP.NET MVC and you love the Razor code syntax like I do, then you will love using these DevExtreme MVC controls there. Which means that even though these are client-side controls, and let me bring that page back up here. Even though that these are client-side controls, meaning that when something is JavaScript and you run on the client side, they data bind differently. Well, as I mentioned, these are wrapped as MVC controls, and so now you get the benefit of client-side rendering with server-side features like seamless data binding, great data validation, all this good stuff. And that's some of the nice aspects. Now, we also give you Visual Studio integration with things like Editor for helpers, as well as file new templates, which I'll show you in just a minute. So there's a lot of features that just come out of the box. And one last thing I want to mention is, more recently, you've probably seen me talk about that we have a lot of products out there. So recently we've introduced a new set of controls for Bootstrap. Now these are a new set of controls, and these are server-side controls. Now these are not specifically based on our client-side controls. And as you've seen me mention before, these are, for example, for web forms, these Bootstrap controls. But more recently, we made these available for ASP.NET Core, and those are in preview mode right now. So how does that fit in with DevExtreme MVC? Is DevExtreme MVC Controls Bootstrap compatible? Yes, they are, which means that there's some slight differences. So you might say, well, how would I decide these are both Bootstrap compatible? The thing is, DevExtreme Controls are compatible with Bootstrap in that you can import in the Bootstrap less file, and then all of our controls will adapt to whatever that theme is, because there's a ton, probably hundreds of themes out there, and we can't go and test every one of them. So rather what we said is we're going to inspect the less file, figure out the variables, figure out the fonts, the themes, and all that stuff, and then adapt, create a CSS file that you can use that our controls will adapt, and of course our controls will work great with Bootstrap. Now these Bootstrap controls are different in that they actually work completely off of, they don't actually have their own themes. They actually derive completely from Bootstrap styles and so forth. So if you're going to use Bootstrap, if you're going to completely base a project on Bootstrap, you might choose this. However, if you love more server-side programming, you might use that approach. This fills a need for those developers who like client-side rendering. There's more controls in this library at the moment. This is just getting started. And of course, these controls, the Web Forms MVC, as I playfully mentioned, there are a classic suite of controls. There's hundreds of controls there. They've been around a long time. They're solid, all that good stuff. And again, DevExtreme has been around now for many years as well. So these are quite solid as well. So again, it just matters. If you like server-side programming, this is probably for you. If you like client-side rendering, DevExtreme is great for that. And if you're going to target Bootstrap, that's where perhaps this fits in. Okay, so that's the long and short of where this product fits in. So how do you get started? Well, on the current website, if you go to js.devexpress.com, you'll see we have a link here called integration. Now we are updating this website, and it's going to have a dedicated link. But at the moment, you see DevExtreme supports a lot of things like Angular, TypeScript, Razor syntax, and jQuery and Knockout and all this good stuff. And if you click on this, read the documentation, you'll find we have great getting started pages, and you can read through this, and this will give you the lowdown as to like, look, here's the NuGet package you need here, or you can add it locally if you've got DevExtreme installed, because we actually installed the NuGet packages there as well, all that good stuff. And you can do this. It's just a little bit more steps than you probably want to go through. So what I recommend instead is we made it very easy for you. Now, in this webinar, I'm going to stick with Visual Studio 2017, and I recommend it. So get the latest version, whatever they have out there. This is 15.4.2, and make sure you get the SDK for .NET Core 2.0. I had again, they make it very easy. However, here's a quick tip I'll tell you is I've had other core projects installed, and if you're on Windows, and you can't figure out why, if you install the SDK, it's not coming up, check your paths folder. And you can define your variables for where the paths are, the environment variables, and where it searches. So sometimes you have to move up a certain folder, and I just had to move up the core SDK folder higher than the 1.1, and then of course everything in Visual Studio started working, like the project templates and stuff. All right, so getting started. I highly recommend, and this is the approach we recommend, is you're going to start a new project. Where do you go to? Well, if you've got our installation installed, then what you'll get is a project template out of the box. Now, if you click in your Visual Studio and say click new project, you're going to get a list of projects here. So here I've got under Visual C Sharp, I've got .NET Core. And if you look further down, you'll see DevExtreme. Now, these are all the DevExtreme. Now, you have to forgive me. I got two major installations here. I got 17.1 and 17.2. But you'll see, we try to address a lot of your needs. Now, if you're using ASP.NET MVC, full framework, then you're going to use this ASP.NET 5 project template. However, if you're going to be using .NET Core, then you might want to use this specific one for .NET Core. Now, I tend to do it from this Visual C Sharp .NET Core, and I'll choose this. Now, of course, you can use the latest full framework with this .NET framework, but again, this won't give you the cross-platform approach. You want to use this one. So I'm going to stick with this one. Now, when I do this and I click OK, what I'll get is a new project template that is basically it gives you everything you need to get started. Now, at the moment, you can see this uses the model view controllers approach, but as I mentioned, it's fully compatible. So if you'd rather use ASP.NET Razor Pages, the new Razor Pages, it's possible to use that as well, and I'll talk about that in just a second. So when you use ASP.NET Core, and especially, and again, we can see if you right-click on this and you go to Properties, you'll see that we are targeting the Core 2.0 framework. So out of the box, we've got an ASP.NET Core 2.0 template. Now let's just run this and see what we get out of the box when we create this new project template. So we try to make this as simple as possible, but also add enough of an example code in there to help you get started. So out of the box, you see that we've got a project that has basically Bootstrap in it. So here, as you can see, it's got the Bootstrap layout. So as you can see, I've got a menu here, all this good stuff. But when I start minimizing this, you can see I've got the hamburger menu. And you can see my grid is also resizing. So we've got a really nice example that you can run on multiple devices. It's you can already use it. And because it's ASP.NET Core, you can upload this to Azure, you can upload this to Amazon Web Services, wherever, or you can make and I've showed in the past that it's possible to even put this in a Linux Docker installation. This will work everywhere ASP.NET Core 2.0 will work. All DevExtreme controls will work there. And so out of the box, this project template gives us a menu, it gives us a grid, and it gives us features of the grid. Now, we wanted to demonstrate to you that here's a powerful control, the grid control, that is data bound. And you can see this inside the folders. So here, first of all, to use DevExtreme, as I showed you in that other example, there's prerequisites. For example, you need certain NuGet files. Well, guess what? That's added for you automatically. You need to have certain items in your header section. So you need references to, of course, DevExtreme libraries, to CSS files, and as well as JavaScript files and all this stuff. And we add all that for you automatically. Now, you know, you could go ahead and add this yourself if you've got an existing project, but we actually have a solution for that, and I'll show you that as well. So this is the way we recommend it, because here you can also see, like, hey, listen, what if I have, for example, some data. Here I've got a list of orders, and you know, we just put them here just to show you how easy it is to data bind them. So not only do we have some data here, but as you can see in the startup, we've added all the possible options. For example, MVC, as well as routing, but you can come in here and you can see specifically what the grid looks like. So for example, if you go to index, we can see that we have our grid that is being bound to our order class, and specifically how to bind it with the order ID key, add the columns, and then go ahead and add any specific features like paging, filtering, grouping, and even have a summary column as well. So this gives you the best way to easily get started. Now, if you are curious and you might say, well, wait a minute, I want to learn more. I want to mention that when we 17.2, our next major release is around the corner. and we've been blogging about it. You can go to the website. You can see all these blog posts. We're tagging, hey, this is coming soon in this release. So when we do that, this DevExtreme website is going to get updated as well. And therefore, we actually are updating our demos. So for example, when you take a look at our demos with 17.2, you're going to see that all of these demos are also going to get updated for ASP.NET, and they're already out there now. So for example, MVC Core and MVC, but we're updating these as well. You're going to see that further as well. Now, if you want to see these locally, well, when you install 17.2, and actually I should say, you can actually experience all of this today. 17.2 beta is available for DevExtreme today for customers. If you go to devexpress.com and you click on the, let me go up here, and you click on my account, and if you, I'll just show you this real quick because a lot of times people always wonder, hey, where is my download? How do I get to the beta? Well, if you're logged in, you'll find it under my products. Maybe I'll show that a little bit later. Okay, so it's available today. So what that means is when you've got it installed, locally, you're going to get a folder under your public folder. So if you go to your, let me bring this up here. If you go to your C users public folder and under your public documents, you'll see that we install a lot of the demos available locally for you. And we do this so that you can experience it. So of course, under the DevExtreme folder, you'll find the items. Now, if you go to under ASP.NET, you'll find a lot of the web demos already. Now, in 17.2, we are including all of the DevExtreme core demos as well. So if you go and look under public documents, DevExpress demo 17.2 MVC controls, you'll find this solution. Now, if you open up this solution, it is essentially all of our demos written for ASP.NET Core. So let me bring this up in Visual Studio 2017 so you can see exactly how this looks. Now, this is also a great way to not just learn about ASP.NET Core 2.0, but also DevExtreme MVC Controls, because you have a full working solution. So not only do you have that file new experience, but you've got everything that we publish. Now, we're constantly updating these as well. So if you're curious, hey, listen, how do I get the new filter builder control to work with the data grid? Well, we have a great example for that right here available. And again, this shows you how the filter builder can be first declared and then how you would actually use it with the DevExtreme controls as well. Now, this can give you a clear idea of, and again, not only is it for learning purposes, we want you to use this code as well. So if you like the way something looks in these demos, you can completely use that as well. Okay, so that's available as well. Now, I want to make one other mention item, and that is that, you know, what's nice about these project templates as well is when you've got DevExtreme installed locally, that's where these project templates are installed. And we also install the NuGet packages locally so that you can get at them. Now, of course, you can always get them via NuGet. So if you want to go to NuGet and you want to see, hey, can I get this can I get this out from NuGet? Well, of course, once we release them on NuGet, they'll be available. But sometimes some of the early beta stuff you might only get through DevExpress. Okay, that said, let's talk about what about if you go through Microsoft's file new approach? Well, we have a solution for you there as well. Now, as I mentioned earlier, they do have a new thing called Razor Pages. Now I'll just go File New Project here, and again, you'll see that there's a project template, and they put it under one item here now called ASP.NET Core Web Application. So when I select this project template, you'll see that I've got a snazzy new item here, and in it we can make an empty project, we can make a web API project, but these are probably the two main that you'll use. Now here, by default, they want you to say, listen, this Razor Pages is really cool. So we kind of are just saying the web application now will, by default, is going to use Razor Pages. But if you prefer the model view controller, that's there as well. These are both the same, except this uses the model view controller approach. And then they've also added templates for Angular, React, and React with Redux. So I'm going to choose the Razor Pages approach here. And I just want to show this because if you're thinking like, listen, I'm going to go, or you've started a project and you used this project template, how would you go about and start adding DevExtreme here? Well, we saw earlier that, there are some prerequisites for installing DevExtreme to your project. So for example, as you saw, to get DevExtreme working, of course, you need NuGet packages, you need to add references, you need to add items to your, you need to add these packages as well. And, things have changed in Core 2.0, there's no bundles and all that. And actually, I'll mention that in a second. But there's a lot of steps here. So to make this process easier, what we have added is if you've got the installation, you can right click on this project and just say add DevExtreme to the project. Once you do that, the dialog will pop up, says, are you sure you want to add this? Just click OK. And so what's happening, if you look at the bottom here in this blue bar, you'll see what all is happening. So it's adding the Bower packages, it's adding NuGet packages, it's adding project references, and it's going to add as much as you need. Now, we're not going to completely change. Our goal with this process is to only add references so you can start using DevExtreme. Now, so let me show you. At this stage, what's happening is we'll just let it complete here. It's installing the, and it's as fast as your internet connection is and all that. But while that's installing, it's going to not just install that, but it's also going to add some files as well. So at this point, it's telling us the converter has added the references, modified the resources, etc., and changed, the startup file, the view imports, Bower, etc. However, there's one key step that we recommend. So before I do that key step, let me just show you. At this point, while we have added things to this project, the project is still essentially the same. It still is the Microsoft project. It's now more or less enabled, and except for this one key step. So before I do that, let's bring this up here and let me run this. And so what we get out of the box with the Microsoft template is, again, another Bootstrap enabled template. And then we got the hamburger menu, resizing, banners, all this good stuff. And get an about page, all this good stuff. But it was just bare. Now, in order to use DevExtreme, if you remember, you still need to add a bunch of things to update your layout. So you can go and add this to your existing layout now and then change the head section. But we made it a little bit easier by just saying, listen, if you, by default, Microsoft uses this layout file, right? And so this layout, it's fine, it's good. However, it doesn't have those items in the head section that are necessary. So we made one called DevExtreme layout, and it's got all the necessary items. Now, the necessary items, what I mean is all the references. So here, this layout has some other things. For example, links, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But if I go to this DevExtreme layout, I can see that I can start using a control that's derived off of this layout on any of the sub pages. Well, right now, all of these pages are using this layout file. Why? Because under the view start, it's telling it to use that layout file. Now I can easily change it by changing it and telling it to use the DevExtreme layout just by changing one line of code. And that's what the project converter is basically mentioning here, is that says, listen, if you want to enable all these pages to do that, simply do that. Now, when we run this, you're going to say, well, wait a minute, it looks the same, Mehul. Well, it is kind of the same, but I'll show you just to verify that we are using this. We can say DevExtreme MVC Controls here. Oops, Controls. And now, when we take a look at this again, you'll see our layout has updated. So the old layout is using the Microsoft, the new layout is using ours. And again, it's more or less the same. Now, when I say more or less, one thing that might be different is if I click on this About page, You might going, well, wait a minute, it's trying to go to about, is routing broken? No. Our goal is to, as minimally as possible, modify this project. So we didn't change things, for example, and so in the layout page, they've got these tag helpers, and these tag helpers are basically saying, look, if you've got home, go to the home link, go to the about, etc., etc. As you can see in ours, we're just making simple references. So the reason we did not change this is because, like I said, we wanted to minimally not affect your project. So you can, whatever writing you're using, just update our layout page, and of course, it'll work just the same. But what's nice is you can now come in here and go to, for example, the index page, go to the bottom and start adding a grid control here, whatever you want. Now, let's take a quick look at how easy it is to add DevExtreme MVC Controls to Razor pages. Now, because we've upgraded this Microsoft project to use DevExtreme controls with the project converter, we can now go to any Razor page in our project and add a DevExtreme control there. So rather than add it to the index page, let's go to the About page. And if we go to the bottom here, we can start adding it by simply calling the HTML helper. So if I call HTML dot, you can see I have access to the DevExtreme library, and then I can come in and start adding any control. Now, of course, we have a ton of controls, buttons, and so forth. Let's add the calendar control. So now, if we just take a look at this in the browser, we can see that if we go navigate to the About page, we've got the calendar control. Now, you can go further and say, listen, I want to try one of the other slick DevExpress controls, or maybe something a little more fancy with the calendar. You can actually come to any of the examples we have online. And then, for example, let's say if you want to try to use this, where actually we've got options available and all that kind of stuff, just click on the ASP.NET Core tab, and then we'll copy over this bit, and you want to make sure you got all the necessary code, so in case there's other files and so forth. And in our case, this is actually a fairly straightforward sample, but in this example here, now when we run this, you can see if we go back to the About page, we've got a similar set of things. The calendar is functional, all that good stuff. So again, Razor pages are fully supported, and I just wanted to mention that DevExtreme Project Converter makes life really a lot easier. So you can use the Project Converter wizard to upgrade an existing project very easily. Now, in a future blog post, I'm going to be talking specifically about how to do this as well. We have this Project Converter, and again, this Project Converter does quite a bit. For example, in .NET Core, there's no concept of bundles anymore. And so they're starting to use, a hierarchy of environment, script, and link tag helpers instead to give you more flexibility, and how that might affect, things, for example, automated tools. And if you upgrade your project, just change and use that DevExtreme layout, and your life will be a lot easier. Now, again, our 17.2 beta is out. Any of this stuff that I'm showing today, I highly welcome you to try it. And again, you'll find bugs. I'm no doubt. That's the whole point of the beta. But it's going to make the final release better, and we'd love to have you give us that feedback. Okay, that said, let's talk about how to use these controls. So I'm going to show you a quick demo. Now, in all honesty, I've done some of this demo before. Now, let me mention where and how I did that before. So if you go to devexpress.com/webinars, it's Amanda's favorite page, and mine as well. And as you can see, we've got a slew of stuff coming out. But if you look at the bottom link here, see previously recorded webinars. And if you search for core, back in July last year, I did the very first version of this for ASP.NET 1.0. And I showed off, and in this webinar, I go into quite in depth, much more in depth than I'm going to go into today, about how to use a control. And I don't want to recover it too much because too much hasn't changed. And you'll see kind of out of the box that, things just work, whether you're using them with Razor pages or not. And so let me show you in Visual Studio. So let's go back, and I want to use the previous DevExtreme project template. And what I'm going to do is let's go to our, I will go to the index page here. Now, in this index page, I want to show you a couple of things. Now, specifically, how to get started. So I'm going to show you the file new approach to doing this. Now, so we already saw the file new approach, but what about adding a widget? Well, you can see you've got a widget here, but let me talk about how do you actually create a widget. So specifically, first, I want to show a little bit about how to create a widget. So we'll do that, create a widget, and it's drop dead simple. So beyond creating widget, we're going to talk a little bit about how do you data bind it. And when I mean data bind, I don't mean necessarily to a database, but just any binding in general. And then we'll talk about how do you customize it. So we'll talk a little bit about customization. All right, and then I'll wrap it up with how to do events and templates. Now, all of that is quite simple. And I apologize, if sometimes this stuff is new and you're like, Mehul, it's simple for you. But trust me, you do this once, you'll be like, yes, it's actually really simple. So core is really nice in that we've got this razor syntax. And when a project is enabled for DevExtreme, creating a widget is really easy. I simply come in here, start typing razor syntax, and I can call the HTML helper, and I can say, hey, HTML, if I can type HTML, and I can start typing. And as soon as I do that, you can see I've got Microsoft's items here, but specifically I want DevExtreme. So when I click DevExtreme, I can come in here and say, hey, DevExtreme, what do you got for me? Oh, it's got accordions, and I've got access to any of those MVC widgets available. So for example, I can declare a button, and now if I do this, I'll have a button, but it's not really gonna look like anything. So for it, to bind it to something, we need to set a property, for example, like text. So I'll say something like, hey, listen, show a pop-up, and I'm sorry, for the text, I want this button to say something like show. And what is a button going to do? Well, usually when you click a button, you might want it to take some action. In our case, we're going to use it to show a pop-up. Okay, so at this point, let's just see what this gives us out of the box to create a widget. Now, what's nice is razor syntax allows us to, let me come back here, and I will split these two guys so you can see them easier side by side here. Okay, so razor syntax gives us the ability to, at design time, know what's available. So this is strongly bound, and it'll give me an error that says, sorry, there's no such property as text if it doesn't exist, etc., etc. But just by creating that simple sentence there, simple statement there, I've got a button. Now, at this point, it's beautiful and everything, but it doesn't do anything. Why? Because we haven't enabled anything for that button yet. So in order to do that, what we want to do is want to go and say, listen, let's add some functionality to this. So we're going to add an event here. Now, I'll do this on the next line here. And what's nice is we can add an event for click. So I'm going to simply call on click and say, listen, when I call on click, I want you to, and I'm going to use text block here. And if you look at our documentation, a text block isn't the only way. And again, I've talked about this before where there's multiple ways to go about doing this. There's pros and cons to different approaches. But in my case, I'm going to stick with the text block. Mainly because I'm going to be taking advantage of templates later. Okay, so in it, I'm going to make an anonymous function that says when I click this button, I want to call the pop-up. Now at this point, I don't have a pop-up. So you might going, well, okay, well, let's first go make a pop-up before we call the pop-up. Well, as we saw, making a pop-up is real easy. We're just going to call HTML, DevExtreme, and we can call the pop-up widget real easily here. And then, of course, and I can do this. But at this point, I want to make sure before I do that, that I have a way to call the pop-up. Now, we don't want an empty pop-up, so let's put something in the pop-up. And in it, I'll show you the concept of templates and how powerful they can be. So we're gonna use the content template that lets us define what goes in the template here. Now, once again, I'm gonna use that text block, and in it, we're going to, let's close off the block here and make sure we've got enough parentheses and all that good stuff. But in the text block, we can say something like, hello, welcome to DevExtreme MVC Controls. Voila. Okay, so now we've got a pop-up. How do we go about calling this pop-up? At this point, there isn't a way because we haven't identified the pop-up. So we need to give the pop-up an ID so we can reference it. So in my case, we will call it my pop-up, and then I now have a reference to this pop-up. So let's simply create a function here that says, listen, and as you can see, I'm using jQuery syntax here. So here I can refer to this and call this my pop-up, and then we can say, hey, listen, I know this is a DX pop-up control. It's a pop-up widget, and I'm going to call its show method, and that's it. So at this point now, we can run this again, and our pop-up says, hey, listen, here's your pop-up. Here's the content template that defines the text you've got in it. And it's also a modal dialog. So as you can see, I'm clicking around in the back, but nothing responds. And we can move this pop-up around. Again, very simple, very easy to add widgets, customize them, use a template, add an event. And what's really nice is, you can go ahead and further customize this. So for example, if I don't want to have text, but instead say, look, let's take this grid, let's pop the grid in there. What is that like? Well, let's find out. So I'm going to add this grid in here. And now, let me format this text, Control K, Control D in Visual Studio. Okay, so anyways, now we've got our grid inside the pop-up. Now, when we run this, you can see our grid is gone. Well, it's not really gone. We just embedded it in the content template of our pop-up, and you can see everything still works in the grid. Paging, sorting, filtering, all of this good stuff is still available. So that essentially is DevExtreme in ASP.NET Core 2.0. Now, let's talk a little bit about project status. So as I mentioned before, we released this back in 17.1 earlier this year. And all the great features of it are available. So this is officially released. It's we took it out of beta and said, look, it's ready, use it. And we've been getting a ton of great feedback from the support center. So I want to thank all of you who are using this stuff and reporting back and helping this make it a lot better. And again, a lot of great features are available for it. The editor for templates, all this good stuff. Now, if you've been paying attention to our blogs, you'll see that we've been blogging a lot about upcoming features for DevExtreme. Now, if you ever wanted to take a look at the blogs and say, look, how can I find out? You can always filter by a certain tag. So under DevExtreme, you can see I've been posting about new features like the new controls that are coming out and so forth. But specifically for MVC, in 17.2, we've got some cool new things coming out. For example, in the 17.2 release, we are introducing something called Lambda Expressions. So let's talk a little bit about this. Now, those of you familiar with ASP.NET MVC will find this really helpful. So in 17.2, we are extending some of the HTML, some of the Lambda expressions in our HTML helpers to make them even better. So you will now have strongly timed HTML helpers in scenarios, and it also enables scenarios. So what Lambda expressions allow you to do? First of all, is do something simple where, as you saw earlier, we've got an HTML helper, we got the library, and then we got the MVC control. And then the Lambda expression allows us to say, from the model, I want you to strongly data bind this control to this model field. It's magic. I love it. It's awesome, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons we love ASP.NET MVC, ASP.NET Core, is that we can do some cool Lambda expressions like this. Well, in 17.2, we're adding more Lambda expressions. So now you can better declare our widgets. For example, this data grid now can be done using add for and strongly typed with column names. And for example, in the past, you had to use, magic strings. Well, I shouldn't say magic string. You had to just use a string, and this could cause an error. Versus this, it means that you have IntelliSense. You have not just IntelliSense support, but you have the ability to find out if something is not, if you're trying to link to a column that doesn't exist, and what getters and setters that are available for it. All that good stuff. And you also get support for data annotations. So what that means is that you get, because these in the model have attributes on them, for example, what the category name says, but we can also see, well, product sales is only a decimal type. Well, when the grid binds to that now, it's going to go, oh, automatically I see it's a decimal, so I'm going to properly represent that. And then, of course, this means that you get better validation. So, of course, we're going to honor attributes such as required string length and range, and it's going to apply them both on the client side as well. So it's all configured for you automatically. And what's really nice about this is that this has enabled for our customers a scenario a lot of you have asked for. As I mentioned, it was highly requested, and that is a strongly typed form control. What this means is DevExtreme has had a really awesome form control. So let me just show you that real quick. If you go to demos, and if you take a look and just type form, you'll see we've got this form. And if you click on overview, and what it basically does is allows you to represent and create a form. And so that says, listen, I've got several widgets and I want to essentially have a form that people can use to enter data and stuff. And it's very slick. It's got all sorts of cool fields. You can do grouped fields for better layout. You can do, the columns can be adaptive. So for example, if you're running them on a different size screen, you'll see that they can adapt. There's all sorts of great features. It's an awesome control. However, using them with Lambda expressions, using it before wasn't as simple because, again, with better Lambda expressions now, we can do this. We can say, listen, I've got a form that's going to bind to the employee, and I want you to add an item that binds to first name, or I want you to create a group and then add the items for the address. Again, this is an awesome, easy way to now create the DevExtreme form control, strongly bound with the new support for the Lambda expressions. Okay, now it's optional still, so you don't have to rewrite all your code, but if you are doing a new project or a new form, you'll really, really appreciate what's got coming out in 17.2. All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the data source improvements that we've done as well. Now, I actually have been talking about this since back in July, I believe. So let's go back here, and let me find that. Yeah, okay. So I just blogged about this recently, but way back in July, we talked about a new thing that we're going to be doing and changing the behavior of how the URLs are generated for .mvc and .web API data sources. And we had found, some customers had found and reported back some issues to us. And we found that, listen, we're going to be changing this around. So back in 17.5, I mentioned that, listen, it's optional for now, and you can enable it. But in 17.2, this new flag called, this new property use legacy routing will no longer be optional, and you'll actually have to use the old way. So we call it use legacy routing, and you'll have to set it to true in 17.2. In 17.0, and it was optional. But basically, this new approach enables things like support for areas, and it just works a little bit differently but better for working with .mvc and .wapi controllers and hosts and so forth. So again, this has been updated, and you can actually test this again right now with either the beta that's available out there now, or if you're using DevExtreme. DevExtreme is also, as you know, out on NuGet, and if you're not aware, DevExtreme is out there on NuGet, and you can completely see everything the team is working on. They every couple of weeks they do a new release, and if you like the latest and greatest, you can join in on the fun there as well. All right. Lastly, I'll talk a little bit about name templates. I don't want to show the demo for that now because we're preparing all the demos for 17.2 and we're updating our websites. But name template is going to make it a lot easier. It's a new template that's going to make embedding nesting controls way easier, way simpler, but also give you the ability to do unlimited nesting, all this scenarios. So that's coming in 17.2. And if you want to see that, and I apologize for the cliffhanger, but I do want you to join in the webinars. Join mi amigo, Julio, or Julian as I call him. Him and I believe, are presenting this on November 30th. And so join us for that, and we're going to show you that in DevExtreme what's new as well. So when you join in, I'll talk a little bit, and I'll show you the demos and all that good stuff there. Okay, I will simply wrap this up by saying, look, yes, this is a long URL, but if you don't want to search by that, just click on Products under DevExpress, and you'll see the link for DevExtreme MVC Controls. So if you go to the top here, and you click Products, click on ASP.NET MVC and Core. And again, if you aren't sure which one should I use, Mehul, I'm still confused. First start with what do you need. Don't look at, a lot of times people say, well, somebody emailed me recently and said, well, ASP.NET Core is the future. Why isn't your rich edit available on Core yet? We're working on it. There's limitations to ASP.NET Core still. There's things in our export library that we can't easily port. There's things like system.drawing. That's still something they're working on. So again, don't necessarily just jump on the latest and greatest bandwagons. You want to serve your users' needs. And if they need a spreadsheet control, hey, you might want to use this. But if you are like, no, I really love what data grid and how client-side rendering and those client-side charts with SVG, man, those are fantastic. Choose this. And again, if you're not sure what to choose, you can always email me at mehul@devexpress.com or tweet at me. I'd be happy to help you figure it out. And our approach is simply we want you using them. But specifically, these controls, they are fantastic. You've heard me talk about them for like a year and a half now. So go try them today. Give us your feedback, especially in ASP.NET Core 2.0. We're updating, our project templates are already updated for 17.2, so get the latest beta, and you can try that out today, and let us know what you think. So with that, I will hand it back to you, Amanda, and if we've got any questions, I'd love to answer them.
Hey, Mehul, we did have several questions come in, some of which the team did answer. Let's see what we've got. DevExtreme ASP.NET Core 2.0, will there be a report component? And if so, will it have an end-user designer and run under Linux, other platforms than Windows?
The answer, I believe, well, okay, so let's go. The answer is, and I apologize for this, both yes and no. And what I mean by yes is it's available. No, because reporting is a server-side activity. So what I mean by that is generally you're not going to generate the report on the client side and data bind on the client side, right? You're going to, especially if you have a ton of data, you want to definitely do that on the server side. So our reporting controls are going to be running on the server side. Now, that said, that's available today, but the reports it generates are completely available to run on any client side. and that's available today. And if you take a look at past webinars, I have actually done a webinar about this. I think reporting, not the server, how to display reports in client-side web apps. So that was about a year ago, and too much of it hasn't changed. So if you actually are curious about this, you can actually go to support, and there's actually a great thread that tracks the. So there's a solution that I worked on, a solution I worked off of, I should say, a Code Center project that does this. Now, here's a quick primer. You can always go to ASP.NET, for example, MVC or something like that, or any. I think, is there a reporting option? There might be. I can't tell. But basically, you can type in here. You say reporting core or something like that, and one of these will come up. And so, for example, how do you add extra reports to MVC core? And it'll definitely, most all answers will lead you back to this specific solution that again has a lot of what you want to do. How do you integrate DevExpress reporting controls into MVC project? Again, you can take a look at that webinar that I did, but the short answer is the reports can be run anywhere. They are fully rendered client side. They run on Linux, anything. Server, they do not. Why? Because the reporting is still based off of some libraries that are not fully available for core yet. We're always looking for good ways to do that, and once we have a solution for that, we will definitely announce it. It's something we're looking at quite a bit, but again, just because Microsoft has easily ported some of their stuff doesn't mean that everything, Microsoft didn't port web forms to ASP.NET Core. Why? They tried and they said, sorry, it's just not possible, right? So for example, in the same way, we rely on certain libraries in the .NET Full framework that are necessary to bring you some great features and powerful functionality that isn't quite possible, fully possible yet. We're always looking, so just keep sending us those requests, and we'll keep looking. But we are, I want to let you know, actively looking.
All right, from Boris, it's more of a comment, I suppose. It would be nice to see an example with Razor Pages binding instead of controller.
Boris, you know what? If you join that What's New webinar in 17.2, I will do that just for you, amigo. I promise you. We're just, I want to wait until the team is still finishing up some last minute things, even though the beta is out, the feedback is coming in. And again, once the demos are also available, I'll show that as well. I will absolutely show that as well. It's not too different. And as you saw from the the example that I showed you with the DevExtreme core demos here, well, I'll tell you what, I will point you to a link afterwards. Shoot me a message in the email or on Twitter, and I will definitely send you a sample of that as well. And I was going to tell you, like in the past webinar, I mentioned this, right? And I want to mention this as well because these were available, but we've deprecated them. So, you can see it's obsolete. And that's because we've started to include them already with our installation. So, and there's other demos. So just come to the 17.2 webinar or shoot me an email and I'll show you that it's Razor Pages. It's nice. It's not that complicated, and you'll do a similar.
Great. That's all the questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda, and thanks for everyone for joining. I'll hand it back to you.
Great. All right. Like I mentioned before, today's webinar will be made available later on our DevExpress YouTube channel. I will post that link in the chat box right now. And also, as Mehul mentioned, our 17.2 launch webinars are posted and ready for registration. You can visit devexpress.com/webinars to sign up today. And that is it for this one. Thank you so much to Mehul. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, thank you for choosing DevExpress. Bye-bye.